Hi guys, Frankie V from Frozen Sand here with another episode of Working with Power Tools, and in this episode we're going to continue on with our conversion of Casa or from Urban Terror 4.2 over to Urban Terror HD. And after each time I hit some form of a landmark achievement, I say a requirement that being able to do the conversion in a logical and easy to accomplish manner, I'll get on and do somewhat of a play blast kind of lecture kind of thing, make a bit of a show out of it or whatever. There will be no nudity involved, of course, but to do some let's say some house cleaning stuff here. There might have been something that I've kind of missed in the previous episode, as obviously it's because I harped on it, is the need to get whatever map you're converting. You should do this in general anyways, and get something out and into Unreal 4 as soon as possible, as part of the requirement to be able to create a relative scaling, let's say, proxy between how big things are in Unreal 4 versus how things are translated back into an application like Blender, 3ds Max, and Maya, which is the last time I'm going to say it that way. Everything's going to be 3ds Max from now on. And bring in the player models to check out to make sure that your relative scaling is correct. Now, this is something that usually causes people's heads to explode because you're dealing with numbers and this and that and the other thing. The thing to remember is, in this case of doing the conversion, is ITEX 3 is world unit measurement is 1 unit equals 1 inch. So in theory, you can make something to that real world scale. So if you wanted to make a door, you can measure out a door and you can make a door to that measurement, and it will be reflected by that measurement in units in Unreal or Unreal. Boy, why do I keep going back to that? In Urban Terror. So a 6-foot door would be a 6-foot door, but of course that doesn't really work out that way because of the relative scaling differences between real world and what you see on a two-dimensional screen the size of a monitor. You don't have that peripheral vision to give you the full picture as to impact as to relative scaling. So normally you're going to find yourself jacking up the measurements anyway. So the solution to the whole problem is to let your eyes tell you the truth of what it looks like. If it looks good, it's good. So, if a door is bigger than it is, trust me, nobody's going to notice that the door is 0.25% bigger than its real world equivalent. But we need to be a little bit more, let's say, a little bit more concerned about doing a conversion, such as a map as Casa, because obviously there's an expectation that this map's going to be translate over into Unreal 4 the same way as it's being presented in ITEX 3. So we want to double check and make sure. But as you can see, obviously with the character here, I'm happy with that. I just kind of move it around a bit and compare it and what have you. Well, I didn't really do it that way. I was being a little bit more, let's say, I wouldn't say professional, but definitely a little bit, paying a little bit more attention, a little closer attention to making sure that the size difference is a moot point. Now, to accomplish that, the first thing I did prior to importing was I changed my unit setups to 1 inch, 1 unit equals 1 inch, which conforms to the ITEX 3 measuring system. So boom, and then from there I was able to I imported the OBJ, which then translated into its true size as comparison between what would be normally exported out into Urban Terror as a map. That's to say that it came in, how you see it in this screen here is how big, as to relative size as the game engine itself. No difference. Then I imported a 4.2 player model. Yes, I have 4.2 player models, and I positioned the toes right on the edge of this area down here. So that gives me the relative scaling of the player model as compared to the relationship between the relative scaling of the environment. Then I just simply select everything, did a grouped it together, including the player model, and then I changed the unit setups to 1 unit equals 1 centimeter. Boom. Okay. So now, with that said, that our world now sees everything in this 1 unit as 1 centimeter, and I imported the default FX mannequin, Blue Man, which is 6 foot and a bit, and I lined up the toes to the 4.2 player model, and of course it was I believe it was taller. Yeah, it was taller from toe to head. Then I just snapped my grid point or my pivot to the toes of the player, and then I just go ahead and did a scale, and then scaled it up until the top of the head of the 4.2 player model matched up with the top of the head of the FX mannequin under 1 unit equals 1 centimeter. Boom. Our scale is relative to what it would be if this map was just a straight 1-to-1 conversion from 1 unit equals 1 inch to 1 unit equals 1 inch. So that that solved that problem there. I kind of mentioned this off because it is something that you're going to run. It is the first problem you're going to run into. I bet you we're going to have some converters, people converting their environments and say, "Hey, my map's too small." So just be aware of that, and you save me some hassle. Just tell them that they just I'll eyeball it and get it to the right size. Do it this way, and they'll be happy and content. So that's kind of out of the way. Let's go back to just make sure we didn't screw everything up here. We'll just go ahead and reload everything up, and let's take a look at where we're at. Okay. Yes. Okay, I just want to kind of mention that this is not a Frozen Sand map. This was handed over to us by Sweet Nuts under stewardship. In other words, we have permission to make any changes, make any fixes. I'm assuming that the conversion is also included as far as that. So he's the mapper. He gets original credit. What we're doing here is nothing more than an oil change. So the stuff that's in this map will still stay in this map. So you got the tagging down here. That's going to belong there, stick there. There's some other stuff, tags down here too as well. We're going to do some little bit of updates here, like there's like the Bazier down here. That's going to be changed with none of this fakey stuff. We're going to put in a real Bazier and have it blowing in the wind, so to speak. So keep those kind of. I'm assuming that's kind of a chuckle kind of thing that was added. I don't know. Every map has a story, and it'd be interesting to hear what the story is behind this, because there's a lot of tagging and what have you going on. So anyways, this is a landmark episode, meaning that anytime I complete a given task that is required, then I'm going to get onto the YouTubes and do a presentation in lecture form. Unfortunately, a conversion is not difficult at all in reality. But it is difficult to it's a chicken versus the egg thing, because there are things that are rather important that should be done, but they are usually generally deferred later down the road, and then without any kind of connectivity from that idea, you get this silly little idea over here, which adds to the bigger picture down there. So that's not really how it works. This is the nature of what's called iteration. That's the big thing. That's the buzzword, I think, is to be able to create a connectivity between 3ds Max to FBX into Unreal 4. Now, a bit of an explanation about FBX. FBX is a pretty important part of this chain here, in that it is, the impression of what it is actually kind of wrong. Well, it's not really a file format, as it is a means to be able to exchange between one application and data information from one application to the other through a DCC chain. Now, the DCC chain refers to digitally created content. Now, digitally created content is now getting into the world of the Ethernet, so to speak, where things are handled cloud-based and it's transparent to the end user, and they don't really need to be worried about how things move around. Now, to give an example of that, is with this selection, I can select export. I can go to the send to feature, send to, send as new scene, based on my selection. We give it a minute or two, and up pops Motion Builder, boom, 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 does its thing, and snappo, it's in there somewhere. Did it make it in there? Usually does. Okay, let's give this another shot. Let's see what we got here. Okay, did I make a selection? Let's make a selection. We'll do a send to Motion Builder, update current scene. Now we'll add to it. Boom. And that should bring that that little piece, that little panel over into Motion Builder. Where are you? There you are. And there it is. Okay, we didn't have I guess we didn't have a connection, or I just kind of lost it it's in here somewhere. We're looking at back facing or whatever, crawling and what going on here. But anyways, you can see how it just kind of pops over here into Motion Builder. If I wanted to, I can animate this, move this around, and then go over here and then send this right back to 3ds Max, and everything happens in a transparent fashion. That's FVX. FVX is designed to be used as a transparent exporter of data under a cloud-based system. So be it we're local, you can see that I can quite easily locally move that piece of bit of data from 3ds Max over to Motion Builder. That could be anywhere in the world, as long as there is somebody can connect to the FBX server manager. I can quite easily send data that simple to somebody halfway across the planet. So that's the reason for that. Yeah, FBX is a cloud-based DCC compatible wrapper and is a native format to Motion Builder. So it is in reality a unified file format would be a good description of it. So we need to kind of keep that in mind. And the only reason that we have actually a UI to deal with at all, period, of course, is it's going to take about another 10 years before we have that transportability where we can just click on this and say, send it over to Unreal 4, and then all our problems are done. In Unreal 4, we say, well, that doesn't look quite fit. We need to make some cuts into this prefab. I'll send it over to 3ds Max. Boom, 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 boom. Everything goes back and forth. So does Unreal 4 need an editor? No, because the viewport becomes transparent between one application to the other, and it doesn't really matter what you're using. The whole thing just sort of works together. So that's the important part of the FVX exporter, kind of explained as part of this procedure. I won't harp on it later. It is a key feature. It's a game-changing feature, let's say. So be it we save as a Max file or we save it as an FBX file, it doesn't matter. It's both native formats, and it should be handled and dealt with in the same manner. So we always have access to our source material. So if we, for example, what's the point of making a map object, saving it out as FBX, and then save it out as native format? You just basically duplicated you duplicated the same asset. You have two of the same assets, say a map object, in two different formats. That's all it is. Okay, so sorry to harp on that a bit, but it is important for you to understand that as part of this chain, how things are interconnected between an application like 3ds Max as being using this as the map maker versus Unreal 4, which now has taken on the role as the world builder of how things are staged that allows you to run around inside a three-dimensional environment with a gun. We can't run around in 3ds Max with a gun. It would be nice, but it can't be done. Okay, so now moving on to our cornerstone here, where we're at. We'll go over here, and hopefully we won't get too kerfluggled. Okay, as you can see, I have things broken down on blocks. Now, to kind of backtrack a bit, we first established the ability that the first requirement was to establish a connection between the different objects and our scene as part of that import, connect the material to it that is identified by that import as the object's name. So let's bring up the material editor here. Bring that over. And if I do the eyedropper selection here, you can see that the material is indeed brought in, and there's the naming of the material itself. It corresponds to the texture. So we have a connectivity as far as maintaining continuity of our working assets. If we were to bring this in as a default material, we got lazy, we don't want to name stuff, and we've made it a 04 default with that particular material onto it. It becomes difficult to identify once it is imported by Unreal 4 by default. You would say, bring in material, bring in the textures, this material is connected to that, blah, 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 and next thing you know, you want to go on and make some modifications, so you go, well, where is it? Like the Bezier. This is a good example. This is actually the best example. It made me chuckle. Okay. How to find that material? Well, it's actually kind of easy. So be able to identify your materials into the scene and what they're connected to is almost a must. You're going to get lost rather fast. once you have established your pipeline, then you don't really need to actually hide anything. You can work everything in the scene because you know where they are relative to their position. You know their connectivity to the material is true, and you know, we're doing everything as edit in place. Now now we're getting a little bit closer to what we're dealing with here as far as breaking things down into blocks goes. You know, this takes a little bit of a setup. And okay, so where are we at here? So that's the idea of edit in place. Now, edit in place means that every object within 3ds Max will snap in like Lego blocks relative to world space 0, 0, 0 as the origin. That means if I select this, let's say select this rooftop here, and I select my move tool, you can see I have a spatial difference between where it is relative to 0, 0, 0. So this number here jives because we're using 1 inch unit equals 1 inch, 1 unit equals 1 centimeter. Then this jives with where it would be relative position in Unreal 4. So if we export this, this is where it's going to snap into place if we 0, 0, 0 it out. So that's edit in place. So we now have what we've established is we have definitely established a relative correspondence between this environment being no different than it would be if we had moved it over into Unreal 4. There's still zero deviation between how we're editing it. The only difference here is, of course, is we're working in a different viewport. That's it, nothing else. Okay, so moving on forward here, what is another critical point that we need to point out? I think we covered everything that we need to cover there. Anything to trip over before we actually get over into what's the drive behind us all? Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm seeing 3 more episodes out of this. The next episode is going to be UCX, dealing with building in-app app collision. So as part of the block, so when we export the block, the collision is in place, and any time that we make any changes to that block, we can change quickly and easily the collision and the information that is applied to that particular section of our environment. Next one after that will be the actual building part, bringing all these parts back into building into Unreal 4. Now that we know that the relative scaling is true, then anything that we've done in there so far is scrapped, is gone, and we don't need it because we're going to be rebuilding everything anyways, as far as material connectivities and what have you, to make sure that everything comes in, and anything after that is going to be all about the iteration process. And then the last episode will be artistic prerogative. The ideal right now, of course, is how you see it in the original video, is how Casa is going to look like once it meets Urban Terror HD. But we're going to get into the artistic prerogative part of it, where things that need to be changed will be done through what's called map objects. So, for example, fakey stuff. Windows will become real windows. Blinds will become real blinds as far as geometry. All this fancy artwork here will be done. And then once we get to that point, obviously I'm going to harp over over how we can maintain a performance curve. It's going to be a 0 factor as far as digesting it goes. So where we're at is so far, as far as total scene, I mentioned this already, is 24K. And if you cannot play Casa in Urban Terror HD on your poor little pooter, you might want to give your grandma or K-Pro back, because this is definitely terminal velocity. It doesn't get any faster than this in any game that I've seen. This is portable. This is portable territory. This is playing it on your telephone territory. So, anyways, now to get on to the point here. We've had our fun. Okay, as you can see, this is the layer, the master. This is my master layering. This is how we want our control over our assets, as far as moving through the pipeline, to be configured as far as going from 3ds Max to FBX into Unreal 4. The filing structure, the directory structure, is going to be identical to how I have things set up here as far as the layer goes. And then, of course, once we get into Unreal 4, everything's going to be broken down under the under the map folder as to individual blocks, as to building this stuff up. We're doing everything in place. 24K is, map objects are bigger than that. This is all facade work. This is stuff that this is just fakery or whatever, but it's pretty darn good fakery. Anyways, that's how we're going to have this kind of thing set up. Now, how to be able to break things down in blocks. This is probably the part of the episode, the lecture that you were waiting for, is how do we divide and conquer the different types of elements into blocks, and I like to call logic blocks, which is a better description of what it actually is. We are using logic to be able to define what goes into each of these subfolders. So if we look at the subfolder as it is, say block 3, we got block 3 _01, block 3 02, block 3. So what are these different blocks is a representative of the different types of materials that were harvested out of the import. Mentioning it back at the top is when we import it as OBJ, each of the objects is defined by the materials that have been assigned to it, which helps us to create that material connection between the object and giving it a proper name, which imports like butter into Unreal 4. Now we need to divide and conquer. We're not too worried about the naming convention of any object anymore because we've assigned the material. The material now defines the object. So, Bezier. So we now want to be able to kind of subtract, divide, and conquer. So when we're over here on the other side of the world, we're not looking over here. We're not seeing everything else being rendered even when we don't see it. So we want to break things down. Okay, so how we do that is, first of all, at the top here, you can see I got a folder called Done. Now, Done is my default name for anything that's going to be scrapped. Junk, stuff that can be tossed away at a later date. I also obviously have another folder underneath it that's called Junk, because that's where I put stuff that I don't know what this belongs to, but I want to make sure that I keep it. So to start off with, you would grab everything as part of your scene as a single asset. We've got 1,179 objects, and we would then just simply go add selected objects to this folder, to the Done folder. Now, the Done folder has a special purpose, which I'll get to in just a moment. Excuse me. So, I select all the objects to be able to harvest out and create these different block sections, and then put on what's called an instant edit poly modifier. It's just an edit poly modifier, but you're going to see the difference in a moment. It is highlighted by italics. Anytime you see something highlighted by italics, you know it is an instance or is connected to something else. So if you make a copy of an object and you make it an instant copy, and it'll be in italics, and you'll know that if you make any edits to that copy, it is translated into the copy, into the original master. So you'll be editing away, you go, okay, that's great, and you go, okay, where's my original? Boom, you go back to it, and just go, hey, wait a minute. Okay, joking aside, time to get back to seriousness. To create the block, I usually select elements, and then I'll select and highlight this area down here. We already know, I'll be demonstrating this just a moment of what's going on here, and of what this actually contains data-wise, and then go ahead and deselect. That's actually a pretty tough area to grab hold of. Okay, to deselect all this stuff here, and you can just sort of see it popping off. I like to call this, refer to this as weeding, because we're weeding out unnecessary geometry. We want to make sure that it doesn't get involved in our selection. Okay, I think that should do it for the purpose of demonstration. And I'm just going to do a detach, and you can see that all of a sudden it's no longer selected. And then we'll do a Control I, which in layman term is a selection. What did we miss out? You can see we missed some stuff down in there, which gives us an opportunity to discuss the solution to that. So with this selection made, let's call this something. Actually, we'll call this block 100, as in logic block 100. And now, if we when we made it, it was included as part of that selection, and we've created a block with this information and data that's in it. But if we look underneath it, you can see that everything's now called OBJ, whatever number, and that's not really, let's say, a great way to keep track of stuff. You have everything based, everything will be called object. Nothing is divided defined by this being part of block 100. So we'll just select all that. We'll go over to our tool selection here, and we will rename object, block block 100 underscore to keep it a separator, and then we're going to number everything from base number 100 on up. So now when we close our block and reopen it again, now everything is defined, and within that block as defined is 100. Now this gives us to kind of move on forward. You can see that we kind of missed a whole bunch of stuff down here. So weeding, once again, we can just go back in and do a selection. This puts us back into our subs, our instant edit poly modifier, and we can select this stuff here, and this here, and this here, and that gives us that grouping there. Okay, and if we do a detach again and we do a control invert, that gives us our select. Oops, no, we need to get out of sub selection. We go to control invert, and then we'll just add that to the bunch, and we just continue weeding and so forth. And then you can sort of flash the object. The flashing being if we turn it off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on. We get a better idea of how things are connected. So that's how you would create the sub-object selection. Now I'm going to go back to my original clean fixed point source file here. And we're going to bring back up our layer managers, and we're going to have a final discussion here of what is what. Okay, so let's select everything. Let's select you. Let's select you all the way down to you, and we'll turn everybody off so nobody's visible. And the first weeding would be things that I would consider to be map objects as non-structural supporting objects. In this case, a lot of planters, a lot of grass surfaces, 2x4s and planks and tags and whatever. Those would be the first things that I would probably weed out. And once those are weeded out under map objects, then things we don't have to worry about them. The second thing would be walls that are non-supportive. Obviously, I have some detailed stuff down here that got included as part of walls that should belong under a block. So once again, this is a weeding process. We can easily create, correct, and put these things into proper block folders because it's easy to identify. You bring up, open up one of these, you select any object into it, and we know that that's block 25. So once again, connectivity to our asset. Okay, so the walls, they can be hidden out. And ground is special in that we want to continue the weeding process until this is what we're left with. And this is a pretty important part. This is probably the most important element in your project, particularly as far as conversion goes, and that this is what the player runs on. So this is going to be the base platform, the Lego master, where things are going to start snapping into. So we want to be able to get this out. It would be probably the first thing to be pushed out. We need some special consideration. We'll discuss that in the UCX collision episode, and how to bring this in and have it all properly set up so it's relative. Once again, we need to be relative. This needs to be relative to 0, 0, 0 at all times, because then that tells us if anything else that's gone kind of out of whack. So one last thing. This is why we put everything into the done folder to begin with, because if I go control masses selection, it gives us 86 objects. But if we look at our poly counter, how many surfaces do we have in it? 0. This is all what this is the remnants of doing that kind of calling, of doing a instant edit poly modifier, because you're actually detaching an object from itself that is by itself. Hard to explain, easy to demonstrate. Let me show you. Okay, we'll create a object. Okay, we'll create a simple primitive object we'll call a plane. And it's kind of cheating. Drag that out, and then we'll go over to convert that over to an editable poly modifier, and then we'll go ahead and grab all of that, and then we'll do a detach. Okay, and if we look at the scene, there should be only one object, but there's two. There's the object that we pulled off, and there's our original plane. But the plane has no surfaces. It's a null object. Now, it's not a big deal, but depending on what application or what you're doing at the time, it can cause, well, it can cause weird things to happen if you're not aware of that's what's happened. In the case of 3ds Max, the problem that it can create is rendering issues, because the renderer wants to see objects in the screen and then calculate and evaluate what kind of surface it has, what kind of material it has, blah, 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 and then it attempts to render it. So, I've had one object in the scene and didn't have any geometry or any kind of information attached to it whatsoever, and the rendering kept crashing all the time until I finally tracked down the problem. That was no fun. So just so you be aware of that, if you put everything into one directory here and you do that instant edit to harvest out and to create your blocks, then whatever's left in there is null. It has absolutely no geometry whatsoever. Okay, so just to kind of brush things over, what we have here is a logical, the setup of the logical progression, maintaining asset continuity from 3ds Max to FBX to Unreal 4, and everything's going to kind of it's going to look exactly like this as to bringing it out. Block 1 is going to go into a folder under FBX, the FBX source control. Called block 1, and in Unreal 4 there's going to be a subfolder called block 1. So anything goes into block 1 goes over to block 1, and then back to block 1, over to block 1 again. So you can kind of see that cyclic kind of thing going on. So so that's basically the crutch, I guess, of sourcing between 3ds Max and Unreal 4. Everything else you can just kind of make it up as you go along. You don't even really need to store stuff under, it's really just there to be able to do, well, for example, let's unhide everything. We could just do an unhide all. Yes. The editing is not that clunky, so you can just do everything in the viewport like this. And it's as long as you maintain that this is block 33_17, it doesn't matter. You still have that connectivity. You're not going to get lost. It doesn't matter. You have to have 20,000 different objects in the scene. Well, in this case, 24K worth of stuff in the scene. Then that doesn't really matter. Okay, so anyways, I think that's kind of finishes it off. I'm kind of put forward that the next episode is going to be on UCX collision creation. Based under logic blocks, and after that how to snap everything together, and then of course a little bit of fun on the back end, which is going to be the artistic prerogative side of what I would like to do.